Save It for the Blind is sponsored by Kershaw Knives. Kershaw manufactures next-level pocket knives for outdoor enthusiasts. Save It for the Blind is now also being sponsored by Roseville Motorsports. Roseville Motorsports is the greater Sacramento area's premier destination for all your power sports vehicle needs. Stop in today to browse off-road vehicles from leading manufacturers like Polaris, Yamaha, and more. If you guys are enjoying the show, we'd love to hear from you and get your support. Please follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us a 5-star rating. Your reviews really help us grow and reach more people. Thank you for being a part of our community.
What do you guys got going on at Davis right now?
We're about halfway, a little bit more than halfway through the quarter. And so I'm teaching one class, but it's, I've never taught it before. And so I'm building lectures kind of as I go. And I started in February to try to get ahead of things, but my buffer is quickly eroding. So I've got a couple lectures left to write. And that's been my focus for the last few days. So it takes a while.
What's the class?
This is behavioral ecology.
Oh,
so it's a wildlife class. It's focused on animal behavior. But the structure of the class is not great. It's like 2 hours starting at 8:30 in the morning, which is like not what anybody wants to do for 2 hours at 8:30 in the morning. So, but it seems like a good group of students. They're pretty engaged. So yeah, it's been delightful.
Now, what's been the biggest difference with your work at LSU and then now at Davis?
Good question. Still uncovering those differences. Certainly the classes are much bigger. So my largest class at LSU was maybe 35, maybe 40. And I've had 50 in behavioral ecology. I'll have 110 in ornithology. And so the scale at which you can do things, especially in the field, is just very different. I taught a class where we would be in the field for 3 hours every Tuesday, Thursday. And you just can't do that with 50 students, right? Just the logistics of it alone are crazy.
Yeah,
that's been pretty notable.
That's impressive to have that many people. I took ornithology at Chico, and I don't even know if there was 25 kids in the class. I can imagine over 100.
Right. Yeah. And the lab section, where they're learning ideas smaller.
Yeah.
But even still, like 110 students in lecture.
That's a big lecture especially for like a biology specific class. Little upper.
Totally.
Yeah. It's impressive. Yeah.
But good to see the interest, right? I mean, our student enrollment is consistently growing, it seems like. So
that's good.
It was at LSU too. So
good. Well, that's all good to hear. Well, we want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Save It for the Blind. Your normal hosts, Carson, Odegard, and Jeff Smith. And our guest today is Kevin Ringelman with UC Davis. So what's your actual title over at UC Davis?
Hey guys, good to see you. So my name is Kevin Ringelman. I'm an assistant professor at UC Davis. I came here from Louisiana State University, where I taught for 10 years. And so the plan is my hire is supposed to replace John Eadie, who was your guest on the last podcast.
Yeah, it's going to flow well with him being on here and then you filling in his shoes. So it'd be interesting for the folks to get to know you a little bit more coming into that position.
For sure.
Kevin, what's your background? I mean, I know your dad is heavily involved in waterfowl, obviously, but did you grow up in California? Are you native here?
No, I was born in Colorado, and both my mom and dad were avid outdoorsmen, backpacking, hiking, hunting, fishing, both of them. And then my dad, as you mentioned, he was worked for the Colorado Division of Wildlife. So he's a PhD level waterfowl scientist as well. And then in 6th grade, we moved to North Dakota, where he took over as the director of conservation programs for Ducks Unlimited, and he worked there for 20 years. And so, my background is very much steeped in both the active participation in the outdoors and in hunting and things like that, and also sort of with a science twist. My dad was always doing applied management based in scientific principles.
Did he bring you along? Is that what sparked your interest, or were you just always kind of, into the outdoors, tagged along?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I was going out with my mom and dad hunting, shooting shotgun holes with a BB gun before I was able to, pick up a 20 gauge at age 11. But in terms of like going into the field with him in science, I can only remember going out once with him when I was in high school, nest searching on the prairies. Uh-huh. So he never really like pushed me into waterfowl, just kind of let me find my own path. And I think it's been a really cool bonding experience, having gotten a PhD in waterfowl now and having a successful career. I think that he and I both really take a delight in that.
That's great. I mean, did you see yourself becoming a professor early on?
Yeah. Did you have anything else in mind? You'd be a professional baseball player?
Yeah, no, I mean, like I was always like I was good at school, and so in undergrad, I was an undergrad in Ithaca, New York, and end of undergrad was approaching, and just like everyone, I was in a panic about what comes next. I was like, well, I'm pretty good at school, so I guess I'll just do more of that. Applied for PhD programs around the country, and I had a couple different offers that I was considering, and that was a real fork in the road for me. Is like I could have gone to Montana to study passerines in Peru, or go to UC Davis and study waterfowl. And it was kind of a toss up. And so it was a big fork in the road to come to UC Davis and work with John Eadie. And after that, I kind of never looked back. And it was the first time that I TA'd a class that I knew that teaching was also a real passion of mine.
Okay.
And so that, like researching, like teaching, this is kind of the place to be, right? As a professor.
Yeah. So you finished up here under John Eadie, and then did you go to LSU shortly after?
It was pretty short, yeah. So I graduated with my PhD in 2013, and then I went to the University of Delaware for a year to do a postdoc with Chris Williams on black ducks. And then about a year after I started that, the position opened up at LSU when Frank Rower, retired to become full-time at Delta Waterfowl. Interviewed and they took me. So I was there for a full 10 years.
Do you miss being back there compared to out here in California?
Sometimes, this was always my dream job,
okay.
Right? I mean, I always wanted to ascend to John's position. And so I'd had my eye on this for many, many years, right? And so I don't think LSU was a great place to experience for a while. I think the pull of Davis has always been very strong, though. Come football season, I miss watching the LSU Tigers, but of course, we're just at the tail end of crawfish season, and I didn't get any, which is pretty distressing. So some of the things I miss, but it's good to be back in California.
Nice.
When you were over there in LSU, you had a role, right, in the hunter camp or the hunter program that you guys did?
Yeah, for sure. So I sort of co-led it with a couple other faculty there. It's been going on for as long as the one at UC Davis. So when I got there in 2014, we had a couple hunts at private duck clubs. We were taking a dozen students out, and we grew that to where we would put through about 40 students a year on duck hunts and deer hunts at, I don't know, a half dozen different private places. One of the big differences there, so we had a larger numerical reach, and the logistics were a lot easier because LSU was pretty permissive about students going on hunts, and we were using LSU firearms and LSU vehicles and things like that.
Wouldn't fly over here.
LSU firearms. Yeah. You just check those out at the. How'd that work?
They were in my lab next door in gun safe.
That's awesome.
What happened here?
Yeah, no. But one thing I really like about the CWA and Birdhaven camp that is affiliated with UC Davis is that there's additional mentorship in the blind with professionals from the field. Like we would take these kids out at LSU, and they would they'd have a guide, but the guide was not necessarily a waterfowl professional, and so it's kind of they get still a really great perspective from some Cajun who's lived on the marsh for his whole life, and that can be super valuable in itself. But I think there's a different professional aspect to the way that CWA and UC Davis runs their hunt camp that I think is also valuable.
Yeah, are you looking forward to kind of heading that this year and being more heavily involved?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I was tagged along in this past winter. Kind of learned how y'all do your camp, and we're ready to play a pretty active role in the coming season. It's going to be great.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome.
And you were never an attendee of the camp here, were you?
I was not. No, I was in grad school, and John Eadie never asked me to go. So that's on him. I may mention that every now and again to him when I think of it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's funny. We've had a couple other people that we've known that they're like, well, I've hunted a couple times, so I wasn't in the pool of people to go. I was like, yeah, it's too bad. Missed out on a good opportunity.
Yeah, same kind of thing. You know, and I would have gone as a guide, but certainly the actual shooting spots should be left to the students who hadn't participated. And that's, I guess, another difference is that, we had enough students at LSU who had some hunting experience that we couldn't just deny them, right, this opportunity to go on a premier hunt. And so we open it, we prioritize hunters who are first-time hunters, but we let, students who had hunted before go as well. And it kind of builds sort of a mentorship pipeline for students if they want to continue hunting afterwards, so that if you're a first-time hunter and, you really bite into it, then your peer group who are, have their own camp in the bayou and can maybe take you a couple times later in the season. So I think it's a good model.
And Kevin, is there anything that you're overseeing right now on the research side that you're, pretty excited about? I know there's a lot of new technologies and stuff that people are using with the, pit tags or telemetry or whatever. Is there anything that you guys are working on right now?
Yeah, I got a pretty full plate right now. So I still have graduate students at LSU that I'm trying to finish out, as well as students that I brought from LSU to UC Davis, and then 2 graduate students who started at UC Davis when I started. So I'm kind of back and forth to Baton Rouge, and I just got off a Zoom call with one of my co-advisees at LSU. So I don't know how many grad students I have now. It looks like 8, I think.
Oh, wow.
Looking at the board. I just graduated one, and I'm going to graduate another one in June. So they're working on a diversity of projects, from South Louisiana all the way through central Canada. And we're going to start a new goldeneye project in Alaska this summer. So yeah, a big portion of my research program over the last few years has been using drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras to study duck brood ecology. Duck broods, as anyone who's been on the marsh in spring and summer know, are pretty elusive, right? They hide in vegetation, you can't see them, and it's clearly still a critical component of their breeding ecology and life history. And so we've never really been able to get a bead on brood survival at all, because you just can't see them. And so using these sort of eye in the sky and thermal cameras, those ducklings, pop off like Christmas lights out there, even when they're in pretty thick vegetation. So for the first time, we can really get accurate brood counts and fill in, that critical demographic period that's been relatively unknown for waterfowl. So I've got 2 students who are both up in Minnedosa, Manitoba right now. One is doing brood work on canvasbacks, and the other is doing brood work on blue-winged teal. And so in order to determine brood survival, we actually follow individually marked broods around day to day on the landscape. And so for canvasbacks and blue wings both, we are actually affixing a plastic nasal saddle. So it's just a little piece of plastic that fits over the top of the bird's bill, and it's got an alphanumeric code that you can read from the drone.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. That's nuts.
So when we're flying day to day, we can say, oh, there's triangle B on the same wetland.
Yeah, I was wondering how you didn't get mixed up with other birds, but that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's plus C, and she's moved her brood over, 2 wetlands over, and looks like she lost 2 ducklings since we last checked on her. So that's pretty cool. And then with the blue-winged teal, they're also being marked with a small radio transmitter. And we've got a different drone setup that automatically triangulates the location of those birds on the landscape.
What?
And so not only, so pretty crazy tech, right? So we've got these visually marked birds, and we've got these radio marked birds, and between the 2 of them, what we are then able to tell is how often visually marked birds are able to elude us, because sometimes we hear her beeping, and yet we cannot find her. And so all of these detection parameters, right, allow us to calculate how many broods we may be missing using various techniques. And so we can scale our surveys to the appropriate, landscape and temporal scales and understand what our detection probability actually is.
Wow. That's awesome.
Now, is that finished, or are you guys still working on that in terms of when will that be done?
They are in their last field season now, and I understand that pair counts are going to start after the rain passes up in Canada in the next few days, and then they'll be starting nest searching as well. So this is our last field season, so research is ongoing, but I think we're going to get some cool data out of it.
How many field seasons?
Rich did 2 as a grad student and 1 as a tech, and then Grant did 3 as a PhD student.
Okay.
So good quality data.
So when you're looking at these projects, is that something where you as the advisor is helping them find a project, or is it, a student coming up to the professor and saying, hey, why don't we do X, Y, and Z? I mean, how do those get, solidified and picked out?
Really good question. And it's different between LSU and UC Davis. So at LSU, the only support that I could get for students was through grants. And so I would come up with a research project, write the grant proposal, get it funded, and then go out looking for a student to fill it. So in that sense, like broad goals of the research had already been laid out. And we have deliverables to a state agency or an NGO to do the thing that we said we were going to do. One of the things that excites me about the UC Davis position is that there is additional forms of support for graduate students. So when I make tenure again and have access to the Raveling Endowment, that will be one source of funds to support students. We also have teaching assistant positions. So graduate students will be TAs for my waterfowl class or for ornithology, and the university will pay for their stipend and tuition for the quarters that they're TAing. And so what that then allows me to do is when supremely talented students approach me and say, hey, I really want to go to grad school at Davis, and maybe we can figure out a project together, that means that I can support them in some way for a few quarters, maybe a year, until we scope out something that we both like to work on, find somebody who wants to fund it, and then go and seek that out. So it allows, a little bit more flexibility for the student, with a little bit of, I won't say risk, but like less certainty in what exactly they would be doing when they start. So it's kind of a cool opportunity.
You mentioned Goldeneye earlier. Is that Barrows or common? I know John is a Barrows Goldeneye nut.
Yeah, for sure. These are common Goldeneye, and this is one of those. It's a long-term project run just outside of Fairbanks. They've got like 20 years of data.
Oh wow!
And Fish and Wildlife Service guy Eric Taylor, who has been bossing the project, has retired. And so he's looking for someone to sort of take the reins and keep the data set going, kind of thing. And so he and I had talked a few years ago, and it wasn't the right time. But now that I'm in the Pacific Flyway, like it makes a little bit more sense. And so I'll be up there, I think it's the last week of June, just to kind of get a feel for the project and the scope of the field work and things like that. And then, hoping to recruit a master's student to work on it, probably to start in 2026.
So 20 years of data. I mean, what's being done with all that?
So I'm not totally knowledgeable about all the publications that have come out with it, but I'm aware that there's some really interesting demographic models that you really need long-term data on, ducklings and parents, kind of like what John's done for the Wood Duck Project, to sort of understand recruitment rates and environmental factors that influence recruitment year to year. Things like precipitation and weather and, larger cycles like El Nino events and PDOs and things like that. So, longer scale data sets allow you to address more accurately the environmental variability that happens from year to year.
Yeah, I was thinking back to when you're talking about the prairie and the first two students that you were discussing. What's the breeding conditions this year up there where they're doing their survey stuff? Was it good or?
It's locally variable, is what I would say.
Interesting.
So it kind of depends on if you're in Saskatchewan versus Manitoba versus South Dakota. I mean, it's pretty spotty. Like these next few days, Rich was saying that they're going to get like a couple inches of rain in Manitoba. So that's pretty good and good timing. Nesting is just getting going. And so that really solidifies what the snowpack left. And so, it's a little soon to tell what nesting effort is going to be like. And again, like I said, it's going to be regionally variable, but it's not like a super drought year or anything, which is good.
How important is, just my personal curiosity, how important is that weather and a good, nesting conditions for brood success?
So that's a multifaceted question to answer, right? So you need a hard freeze in the fall, and then a bunch of snow to fall on top of that hard freeze, so that it can pool up into water in early spring to attract pairs. Then you need decent grass, right, for nesting hens. And then you need water to persist through July and August to actually fledge those broods. So a lot of pieces need to come together to have those really bumper years on the prairies. And that's one of the reasons that some of our brood work I think is pretty important, is because that's the critical last piece, right? There's a lot of things that happen between settling and fall flight. And if we can just get to a place where we can study how many pairs settle in an area, which is your potential reproductive output, and skip all the rest of the hard work of nest searching and all that, and then just count how many broods are at 15 days old, which effectively their survival is plateaued at that point. That's your fall flight. That's your productivity, pair to brood ratios, right?
Like, do you think like these will be vast surveys with drones in the future, like flying grids to try to find, those surviving after the 15 days? Like, is that possible with technology going forward on a massive scale?
Good question. So clearly we fly the BPOP, right? The Breeding Population Habitat Survey, over 2 million square miles of North America. It's an incredible survey effort. I don't think we'll ever do that with drones, just because, the flight capabilities are not there. But in those BPOP surveys, they also have these air-ground transects. So on those lines that you see on the BPOP map, if you zoom in or you have the right data set, right, like some of those segments of lines are darker, they're boldened. And that's because ground crews get in trucks and they drive to count pairs. And that gives you a visibility correction factor for what people see in the air. Okay, well now you've got pair counts over a reasonably prescribed area. And so what you could very easily do is go back to those areas in July and August and fly them with a drone and count broods in those areas. And in terms of scalability, manpower's obviously the most expensive part, but there are you could potentially contract that out to just drone operators to take video and images and have it processed on the back end. Machine learning and AI can help with that as well. So I think, are we going to do it in 2 or 3 years? Probably not. Is it possible within 10? Maybe. So I think that we could get to some version of that. And again, in order to implement something like that, you would really need to work out these same detection correction factors that we're working on in Canada right now. And we've been in discussions with U.S. Fish and Wildlife about expanding this.
Nice.
With the drones, is there any downside of using them? Obviously, everything you're talking about sounds great, but is there a downside to them?
So the ducks don't, when you fly high enough, they don't respond at all.
How high is high enough?
We're flying in between 150 feet and 200 feet above ground level.
Okay.
And they don't notice at all. And then the zoom cameras are good enough that, again, we can read individual symbols on these plastic nasal saddles. They find birds better. We find twice as many as ground crews do. So that's, and we conduct the surveys 4 times faster. So wow. Those are pretty huge advantages.
Yeah.
Disadvantages are that there can be restrictions in like wilderness areas. We were talking about flying for harlequin ducks, and there's some areas that you can't fly. If you're flying models of drone made by DJI, which is one of the most common drone manufacturers, there are Chinese parts from Huawei in there. And so there are federal properties where you cannot fly those because of national security concerns.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep. But it's kind of variable from wetland management area to wetland management area, and you can get permissions and things. The technology is now advanced such that there are drones made by American companies that can be flown in those areas that are of similar capabilities now. They're more expensive, but that's the one that I just ordered for UC Davis.
What's one of these units cost? It's not your, regular drone.
Amazon drone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to think like, when we're out there flying, we don't need one set of batteries. We need 8 sets of batteries and a battery charger and a generator put in the back of the truck so we can run the battery charger so we can fly all day. So there's a lot of peripherals and with all the bells and whistles, you're looking at like 25 to 35,000.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but if you have to pay less people, you don't have a bunch of people walking around looking for longer times. I guess it probably evens out eventually.
Well, yeah, and then with technology, they're going to get cheaper and cheaper, over time. So,
right. You could pay 6 people to do a job half as well, and pay them every year to do the job half as well, and it takes 4 times longer. Or you buy one drone and have 2 people do it. So, it's reasonably cost effective after the capital expense.
That's interesting. Is there any other technology other than drones that's kind of on the forefront of waterfowl research right now? Or is that the biggest thing that's been going on?
No, I mean, certainly there's, tons of research groups that are using these GPS, GSM telemetry devices that, provide really high resolution data. The USGS crew in California has done a great job of that. We have some geolocators out on black-bellied whistling ducks. And these are light-sensitive devices that use the midpoint between dawn and dusk to estimate longitude, and then they use day length to estimate latitude. And so just like ancient mariners would used to do, it basically geolocates your relative position on the globe. And it's only accurate to, maybe a few hundred miles or something like that. But it's good enough, for whistling ducks to know if they're resident to Louisiana in winter or whether they're migrating to like Panama, right? And so we're just starting to get some returns from those. We've got pit tags out, similar to Dr. Eadie's research on cavity nesting ducks. And then the project that I was on a Zoom call earlier with, we've got some acoustic recording units out in South Louisiana, set up in a grid, and they log gunshots. And
interesting.
And we've also concurrently have these GPS marked pintail flying in and out of the area. So what we're able to do is that for every day of the hunting season, we are able to map out like the acoustic landscape of fear for these ducks, and then understand how their flights interact with hunters as hunters are actively out there in the field shooting guns. So there's a lot of analytical challenges with that, but we're using some machine learning algorithms to pick out gunshots and train models to detect them. So it's been a challenge, but it's been a pretty fascinating experience. They've done similar things. Brad Cohen's lab in Tennessee, and at Forbes Biological Station up in Illinois. So that's another technology that I think is going to be pretty useful into the future.
How many of those sound recording devices do you have on the landscape that are recording these shotgun blasts?
We've got 2 grids of 25.
Oh, wow.
And they're spaced about a mile apart.
Okay. So you're just trying to figure out essentially pressure and what the bird,
Yeah, I mean, it's all about like one of the great goals of waterfowl research is just like understand why birds are where they are, right? Especially in the hunting season and the non-breeding season. And obviously it's tied to water, right? Certainly it's tied to food and habitat, but definitely it's also tied to whether people are shooting at them, right? And it's been difficult to pin down and to actually quantify hunting pressure. There's been a few studies, in the 80s, through the 2000s that have done a little bit of that, but to actually put a number and to quantify pressure, especially spatially and temporally, has been challenging because we can't be everywhere at once. And so these automated recording units kind of allow us to be everywhere at once on the landscape.
Now, on that landscape they're referring to, is it, wildlife area? Is it private land? A little bit of both? Rice fields?
These are rice fields. Okay. This is in rice country, like over by Gaydon, Louisiana. So it's reasonably similar to what you would see in the Central Valley.
Okay.
That's interesting. It makes me want to do it where we have our blinder on like one of our properties to see what the ducks. So you're basically figuring out what the ducks are doing based off the pressure from the shotgun blast and how they're reacting or.
Yeah. I mean, so we don't know how this is all going to play out, right? But I mean, y'all have been in a duck blind, right? So there's got to be some sort of acoustic hangover, right, from getting shot at before you're going to go back to that field again.
Oh, it's a great mystery. Yeah. How many times have we talked about it in the duck blind about why they're doing what they're doing based off of pressure?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have those weather days where it's kind of the same weather pattern over and over, and everyone's like, "There's no birds here." Well, if you get out there an hour and a half before shoot time, there's a lot of birds sitting on the ponds, and going back to safety.
Right. And then we'll have some pieces of property that are probably hunted, much more heavily than others. So, what is their relative bird use? And could we say, tell folks, we're like, hey, you would get a lot more hunting opportunity if you rested this field more, or whatever it is, rested it less. So, there's a lot of practical information that could come out of it as well.
Our hunt program is still accepting applications for spring hunts. Visit calwaterfowl.org to apply today. While you're there, don't miss our membership deal. Purchase a membership and receive a free Realtree sweatshirt while supplies last. You can also apply for hunts, purchase tickets for upcoming events, and show your support for waterfowl conservation. Upcoming events are Roberts Island Banquet in Stockton, June 4th, Rodeo Crockett Banquet in Crockett, June 5th, and Suisun Marsh Field Day at CWA's Grizzly Ranch, June 7th. Suisun Marsh Field Day will be a fun-filled day that includes youth duck calling, shooting, duck banding, over 20 vendors, a raffle, and much more. The pre-sale for steak lunches ends on May 30th, so please purchase them on the CWA website now. Cost is $40.
I have one question
I know, I was
on
so
the
interested in
recordings. The blasts, can you tell if it's like a 12 gauge, 20 gauge, or 410 or anything like that?
Because there's clubs that have gone to like 20 gauge or sub gauge because of their thinking that it doesn't affect the birds.
There's a
lot
lot of those clubs now that, a lot of guys are shooting 28s and, whatever, and a lot of 16 gauges are coming out again. But
totally.
Yeah.
So, the short answer is lots of things affect what a gunshot sounds like. Directionality, is the gun pointed towards the ARU? Is it windy? Is it rainy? And so one of the struggles that we're having in training these AI models to detect gunshots is car doors can sound like gunshots. We have crawfish cannons to haze birds off of crawfish fields, which by definition sound like shots.
Oh, yeah.
And so, distinguishing between gauges, probably not reliable. But you could create a situation, where you could control for some of that. The other thing is, to train these models, we have to have human ears listening to these recordings, eventually, saying, this is a gunshot, this is not a gunshot, not shot, right? And then we can feed it into the model so it learns what a gunshot actually is. And so if you hire an army of student workers that may or may not have, 1,000 hours in the blind listening to the difference between a 12 and a 20, then that's a tall ask.
Yeah.
Right?
Do you see that being an issue with, not as many students having, necessarily like boots on the ground, kind of more of that, field study work, going into academia? I mean, is there a gap there between, someone that's going to be a wildlife manager running a refuge between someone doing something else at a higher level?
A multi-part answer to that question. So I would say when I was at LSU, I would say 30% of the students had some sort of outdoorsy background, for lack of a better term. Many of them were suburban from Baton Rouge and New Orleans and, didn't have a hardcore outdoorsy background. In Davis, for example, the class I'm teaching right now is a wildlife class, behavioral ecology. I've got 50 students. And at the outset, I asked how many of them consider themselves to be hunters or anglers. And I had 4 hands.
Oof.
4. And so it's been my observation that many of these students come into the wildlife field on the basis of zoo vet shows on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And so they come in with without sort of a farm background. I was listening to Eadie's podcast, right? They didn't grow up on a farm driving tractors and 4-wheelers and things like that and backing up boats and, whatever it is, some of those practical field skills, let alone running a bush hog or whatever it is. So those experiences are very hard to build in the course of college, right? My job is not to teach you how to drive a tractor. My job is to teach you evolutionary ecology and how to identify birds and all of those things. And so, there's certainly a role for like internships and externships to teach some of those practical skills. And a lot of those practical skills they get during summer technician work as well. That can be really important. And then, in the course of their post-grad experiences, and maybe getting some an early position at a state agency or something like that. So I think it's kind of a roundabout answer to your question, but I'm not totally sure how to answer it. Like, there's a disconnect, or there's the students arriving to college have less of a quote unquote hook and bullet background than they probably did in the 70s and 80s. We can flesh that out somewhat with field experiences during their college career, but it does remain a gap that didn't exist before.
Was that a similar conversation at LSU? I mean, I just think of Louisiana, like, yeah, everyone's probably caught a fish and done something out in the outdoors. Was it higher, 20, 30 years ago, like it was in California, and it's progressively going down as well?
I would say yes. Yeah. I don't have as good a beat on California, but that was certainly the impression at LSU.
Okay.
But in contrast, like, if you say, how many of you are a hunter and angler, you get 60% of the hands. How many of you know somebody who hunts or have eaten wild game? It's basically the whole class. So there is a difference in culture for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Are your grad students, do they fall along that same percentage, or do you see more hunters and anglers becoming grad students under you or Eadie than what you get in your like generalized classes?
Most of my grad students have been hunters. I'm pausing that. Yeah, I had one student who was a non-hunter, just didn't really want to do it, and it's totally fine. I had one student now who had never hunted, but she went to Birdhaven as part of that camp. She was the only one who didn't actually harvest a bird, which is disappointing. So we'll get her out again. I think she was up for the experience though. So yeah, I mean, my students that I've taken for grad school, not that I asked this question, right? But like, they just happen to have been, hunters.
Yeah. It's just interesting for me looking the outside in, you have a class of say 50 people and 4 raise your hand. And then you got say 8 grad students and 7 of them hunt. It's like, I wonder if there's a higher percentage of those that hunt, even if it's only 4 kids in that class, that end up actually pursuing a higher education level in that field and becoming whatever it is, a wildlife manager or so on and so forth.
I would speculate that they may become hunters between when I ask them that question in class and when they apply for graduate school. So if they get hired, if I hire one of these UC Davis students to go be a field technician for us up in Minnedosa, like, everyone else is going to go on a conservation hunt for snow geese, right? When they're up there early before they're doing their field season. And so they may get exposure just from their peer group. And it spreads sort of socially and culturally based on what they want to do, right? If they don't want to work with waterfowl and they're going to go do white nose syndrome with bats, right? Yeah, they're probably not going to get hunting experience in that. And so they may be, because I work on a game species that is hunted, the likelihood of me having hunters as graduate students is high relative to other wildlife species.
Yeah. It kind of just makes me think about, the Birdhaven camp that we run and how probably important it actually is for the future of a lot of these students if they're going into that field. You have that background now and we talk about it, but that's kind of the real example right there is you got those 5 kids or 4 kids out of 50 that don't hunt. And then you come to Birdhaven, say you've got a bunch more, and now they have that experience going into a professional degree or a graduate position where they can talk about it or at least know what it's about.
Yep. That's always been my philosophy is like, if we do these, Birdhaven hunter camps and we recruit lifetime hunters, that's super duper and totally fantastic. But that's not really the biggest point for me. It's to make sure that the people who are going to be in agencies understand the hunting perspective and understand the passion that these hunters have for the resource. And so when they're making decisions on giant garter snakes or shorebirds or something, that they're also considering other user groups like hunters, and they have that perspective. And even if they don't go into wildlife, bankers are still voters. Tire shop mechanics are still voters.
Yeah.
And so to the extent that we're still reaching the general public and teaching them, about the passion and the sort of the legacy of hunting and conservation, I think is super valuable.
Kevin, what's your one species? What's your favorite to work on?
My favorite to work on or my favorite species? Because those are different.
Let's go both. Let's go both.
My favorite species is definitely northern pintail. I don't mean to suck up on a CWA podcast. They're just really elegant birds. And they're totally addicted to watch, work a decoy spread and be in the marsh in the morning. Favorite to work with, I've actually really come to like blue-winged teal with this project that we have in Canada. There's a lot of them. They're the most abundant species that we see. Their population is doing really well. They've got a lot of personality, and they stay really tight to the nest, so they're easy to capture on the nest. So they're kind of growing on me. I really like working on wood ducks. And in Louisiana, we've got this system where in boxes, we can get wood ducks and black-bellied whistling ducks and hooded mergansers. And sometimes, rarely, we can get eggs of all three species in a single box.
Oh, wow.
So that trifecta is also pretty cool to study because there's a ton of interesting behavior dynamics that can go on when you have a scenario like that.
Are those
go for it.
Are those whistling ducks native to Louisiana, or are they coming over from somewhere else? I don't really have much knowledge at all about them.
Yeah, so their range used to be through South Texas, like their deep historical range. And then they were spreading a little bit into Louisiana, and then pesticides knocked them back in the 1970s, DDT and Aldrin and things like that being sprayed on rice fields. But since about 2005, their populations have been rapidly expanding northward. And so there's stable breeding populations in South Carolina, in Memphis, and there's been prospecting individuals documented as far north as Ontario.
Oh, wow.
There was a pair documented nesting in Nebraska. So they're kind of spreading all over. And so it's a really fascinating time to be studying that species because they're rapidly expanding, and we sort of don't know why. I mean, certainly the expansion of rice agriculture into places like Arkansas has been contributing, but that's not the entire explanation. And of course, they are potentially competing with wood ducks for cavities, right? In places where they did not before. And the thing that we're running into in Louisiana now is that when they show up in like February, March, that's when, the new rice shoots are emerging. And man, as soon as the sheet water hits those rice fields, the whistling ducks get after it. And so there's major crop depredation going on in the early spring in the rice country of Louisiana. And so there's a lot of concern about that. I'm thinking about what would happen if those birds figure out that California also has rice.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, do they have it in them to make it west?
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past them.
That would be crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're talking about like the hunters. I mean, lots of people are pushing for them to be added to the early teal season.
Okay.
To try to reduce the numbers. I don't think that'll ever happen for a variety of reasons, but that's the vibe on whistling ducks.
But there's not. They're using the same dimension box as a wood duck, but they're okay. There's not a special whistling duck box that's bigger. They are bigger,
but not substantially bigger enough to exclude them from wood duck boxes.
Yeah, just looking. I've never had one in hand, obviously, but just looking at it, I'm like, man, that's a tight squeeze, but they're making it work.
It is a tight squeeze, yeah, and they're unique for a variety of other reasons. Both males and females incubate the eggs.
Oh,
we've hatched out boxes that had 58 eggs in them.
Wow.
So there's some really crazy stuff going on with their life history.
Is there any comparisons with like wood ducks and goldeneye and some other cavity nesters that they too do?
So they're all brood parasites. So they'll lay eggs in nests of other birds. And I would say that we don't totally know enough about whistling ducks yet to make that comparison. Um, on the evolutionary tree, like goldeneye or sea ducks, which is very different than akes, which is closer to a dabbling duck, which is very different from whistling ducks, which are more closely related. They act more like swans than other ducks. They're that far evolutionarily removed. So they're quite different.
Interesting.
Have you, or do you know anybody that has done any research in New Zealand?
I know people who have done research in New Zealand. Yeah, that's the home of the New Zealand gray duck, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the name. So whenever New Zealand got mallards on the island, basically the New Zealand gray duck became a hybrid swarm. So I forget what the percentage is, but it's like well north of 90%.
Yeah, they call them like gray lards or something like that, or nicknames.
Yeah, actually have a bunch of mallard genetics in them for sure. A girl named Jen Shepard, working for Tom Arnold, did some work in New Zealand back maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago. That's the last I've heard of New Zealand stuff.
Yeah. Did you have a chance to do any studying in any other countries? I know Eadie had talked about South America, doing some stuff down there.
Yeah, I haven't yet. I am interested in it, and there's actually the Pan-European Duck Symposium in August in Switzerland. And so the organizing committee asked me to fly over there and help lead a workshop with my colleague Mathieu Guillemot on increasing cross collaborations between Europe and North America, because each set of researchers does things very well, but we don't talk enough to each other. Like Europe has all this amazing climate change research on waterfowl, whereas we don't have a ton of that in North America, whereas we've got like a zillion telemetry studies, and they don't have a ton of that in Europe. And so, there's just ways we could be talking back and forth and making, interesting comparisons. Like think about the differences in our hunting culture in North America versus Europe. And so just understanding how birds are functioning in these two regions, I think would be totally fascinating. So I'm gonna fly over there in August and see what's up. I've never been to Europe, so it should be fun.
There you go.
But like, what about their, native population? Isn't my understanding that most of their fall flight is, basically hatchery based and let go? Is there still a wild population that is sustainable that people are also too hunting out there?
You're hitting the boundaries of my knowledge of European law. but yeah, no, I mean there totally are. There's common teal and goldeneye and things like that, tufted ducks that will breed in sort of like northern Scandinavia and then migrate to the North Sea or something like that. So yeah, there are certainly plenty of wild ducks left over there.
Okay. Get your duck DNA on.
Yeah, seriously. So obviously you've spent plenty of time out in the field doing lots of different things with waterfowl. What's been your favorite or most memorable field moment?
I think my most memorable field moment, well, memorable can be good or bad. So I'll tell you.
I love the bad.
Give us the bad first.
The bad was I was doing research in Sassoon Marsh, and I was tracking skunks at night, and I got shot at with a rifle.
Oh, really?
So that was bad. Close enough to hear the zings of the bullets.
Well, at least you're alive still. Jeez almighty.
Yeah. So that was not good. My favorite field memory was for the waterfowl class that I taught in Louisiana. We would take the students on an overnight banding trip to a piece of private property in Shreveport. And on that particular morning, we banded something like 400 waterfowl out of just a couple swim-in traps. And it was a really cool experience because the major donors for Ducks Unlimited were there as well. So the students got to have a whole bunch of networking with scientists and major donors. And so that was a fantastic experience. And then 2 years later, we were at that same property in the same pond on a student hunting trip. And I was with two members of my lab, and green-winged teal came in, and I dropped one, and it was banded 2 years ago by our class.
Wow.
So I'm not a big like taxidermy duck guy really, But that one is the one duck that I have hanging on the wall in my office was the green-winged teal that we banded with an LSU class and that we shot 2 years later with an LSU class. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a full circle moment.
Yeah.
You got to bring me back to the Sassoon Marsh incident. So you're following skunks at night, you said?
Right. Yeah. This was some work that I did where we had GPS collars on predators to see how they were foraging among the duck. And so I was doing my thing at night. These are GPS collars that were simply loggers. And so I had VHF, beeping radios on the collars as well. So I could go out and find the collars. And so I was wandering around listening for the beeps, right? And all of a sudden, like a light came on in the distance. And so I turned my light on, and then I just hear gunshots. And then hit the deck and crawl back and call the techs for a pickup. And it was hectic. This is a story better told, in the evenings over a glass of brown liquor or some kind.
Well, we'll definitely get that one out of you.
That'll be a college camp story.
Yeah.
Yep.
Not super surprising out in Sassoon Marsh. I mean, there's
been
definitely some stuff out there
yeah.
for sure.
Yep, I'm aware.
So with that, I mean, what did you find? I mean, was it super high predation with skunks, going to nests and things like that?
This was a good learning experience. Nothing worked. The entire study was basically a total failure. The collars didn't function as they were supposed to. I wasn't able to catch the number of predators that I thought I would, in part because they were being trapped on the private duck clubs surrounding Grizzly Island. So I didn't catch enough animals, and the animals I caught didn't give any data. So that was pretty much that for that part of the study.
Huh. When you were catching them, were you getting sprayed?
That's so.
Define sprayed.
Yeah, well, exactly right. So when they're in the live trap, like I got to get up there and jab them with with drugs to get them down. And so when they're facing you, that's not the problem, right?
Yeah.
It's that last split second when they turn, that's the problem. And so skunks have two modes. I've learned they can fire hose you or they can poof.
Oh.
And so if they opt for the fire hose, back in my 20s, I was nimble enough to dodge it most of the time. If they poof you, there's really nothing you can do, right? But so I just carried my hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, and dish soap combination. Takes the smell off and go on with your day. But I mostly avoided it.
Yeah.
But that same study has actually now been successfully conducted. A girl named Sam Fino out of South Dakota State had GPS units on like skunks and foxes and badgers and coyotes, and was tracking small mammals and was monitoring duck nests and has like the whole ecosystem basically marked. So her dissertation just came out, I think about a year and a half ago, basically doing the study that I had wanted to do back in 2008.
Interesting. Do you know what she found? Like, what is the number one predator of nest predation?
As in all ecology, it depends.
Yeah.
And there were some complicating factors. The state was doing some predator removal stuff, and there was something about coyotes going on. So I don't recall off the top of my head. I mean, from in general terms, like red foxes can be really bad predators when they're present. Raccoons can be quite bad as well. Badgers can be bad. When we were up in the prairies, we saw a badger like actively eating a nest at like 9:30 in the morning. So ravens can be really horrible when they're present. Like in our site in Saskatchewan, we had like 3% nest survival because of ravens.
Jeez.
Oh, wow.
So, and that's the reason that Grant is in Minnedosa this year, because we couldn't get enough blue-winged teal to survive to even mark the hens.
Wow.
So it was pretty grim. Ravens.
That's wild.
Has there been any predation from river otters? Because I know we have them all over at Grizzly Ranch. You'd think, I mean, they're carnivores. I don't see why they wouldn't.
Yep, it's definitely a thing. Where it's been problematic, again, from my Louisiana perspective, is they construct what's called marsh terraces. It's basically like a linear set of levees to try to restore coastal marsh that's converted to open water back into coastal marsh. And those terraces are great places for things like mottle ducks to nest because they're little islands, right? And who's going to go out there? River otters can go out there. And so that's potentially one interaction of a species of conservation concern and a rapidly expanding predator that's worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, never thought about it until this conversation about. I mean, every time I pull into Grizzly Ranch now, I see river otters in the ditch. Now, obviously, I know they're eating stripers and salmon, but I don't see why they wouldn't pass up a nest or a baby duck swimming around.
For sure, yeah, and that's probably a question that is knowable because the USGS researchers, I forget her name, had surveillance cameras out on nests at Grizzly Island for a couple of years, and so they were capturing predation events. So that is probably an answerable question.
Those things make a mess.
Yeah, they do make a mess. It's smelly and poop in the same exact spot.
Mm-hmm. So if there's a potential student out there, maybe a high schooler or someone junior high, trying to find their way in a career, what type of advice would you give somebody that's, wanting to go the wildlife route?
I mean, the most important thing that I can convey is that this is a career option, like to do wildlife. Like if you like being outside and being in nature and working with animals, that's a choice. And there's a variety of paths, right? You can work for federal agency, Fish and Wildlife Service or USGS or CWA, Ducks Unlimited. You can work for state agencies. You can be a professor. Like there's a ton of opportunities out there. So just know that it is a viable career path. And you can make a living doing it. How do you get involved then? I think you can look out for volunteer opportunities to go banding. That's a potential. And then when you get to college, it's getting to know your professors and engaging with them. I'm still gearing up my California work here, right? I've only been here for a few months. But as I get geared up, I'll be hiring student workers and hiring technicians, right? And I'm going to pull those people from the population of students that I know that come and interact with me, right? So go and talk to your professors. It's important to make those connections. And the waterfowl world, especially, is so small that I can get you that job, right, with a phone call. I can make sure that your application is on top of somebody's pile. And in fact, if you're applying for a duck job and you don't list me as a reference, they're going to call me anyhow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm the duck guy at UC Davis now. So, so understanding that this is a profession that you can make a living at, and then finding those first experiences, and then getting to know your faculty members in your area of interest, I think is my primary advice.
And Kevin, I got one last one for you. What do you want your waterfowl legacy to be when you're all done?
That's a good question.
Certainly, I mean, and John and I have the same opinion on this. Of all the papers that I published that a handful of people read, right? Maybe I'll influence some policy decisions in some way, but it's the generation of students that I'm training, and more than that, the generation of undergraduates that I'm inspiring, is my greatest legacy, because my graduate students are going to go out and have successful careers and influence the people that they interact with. And the undergrads are going to go back to their parents' house and say, Mom, Dad, you wouldn't believe what we did in ornithology today. We went out into the field and we saw this, that, and the other thing, right? And so it's the greatest thing about being a professor is that scalability, that I interact with a new group of undergrads every year and in every class, right? That's a lot of humans. And then these graduate students are going to go on and create their own legacies, right? So it's a genealogy, right? It's a tree that sprinkles down and grows larger with every year. So it's something that I really enjoy, sort of keeping track of what my students are up to and who's doing what. And I don't even know, I've got probably 15 or 20 students that are working for, Ducks Unlimited or Delta Waterfowl or CWA now. I taught a student at LSU that is working for CWA. Zach Stratton is back here.
Yeah.
And Rich King
worked for us. Yeah.
Who's the better student? Who's the better student?
Rich.
No comments.
Rich. I'll answer that one for you, Rich.
I'm thinking Zach had more fun.
Yeah, I would agree.
Zach had more fun.
Right. And Caroline Brady worked for you guys for a long time,
Yep.
right? But before that, she was a tech for me on my PhD work.
Oh, okay.
Now she works for CDFW. So it's all these, these lineages and connections that sort of make the waterfowl community like a really special place.
Yeah, it really is. It's more like a big family. Everyone kind of knows everyone, and now it's been fun getting to know everyone. And it's a small world in the waterfowl community. So, but yeah, Dr. Kevin Ringelman, appreciate you coming on, and we'd love to do a follow-up podcast, potentially college camp, and check back with you to see how all the projects are going.
Sounds good. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be on, and it was great to talk to you this afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks,
appreciate
Kevin.
you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Save It for the Blind podcast. You can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.